and with the FDIC, the use of insurance, of course, is a euphemism. It means the government prints money and bails out the banks.
Wars are extremely expensive. All those troops and guns and fighter planes and drones and bombs have to be paid for. So how to raise the money to pay for them? One way the government does this is through taxes. The government just takes the money from the people.
Now all of a sudden you have to issue war bonds, and people have to get behind the idea and fund it.
Get 'em, folks. Come on, skip right up and get 'em. Any bonds today? Bonds of freedom, that's what I'm selling. Any bonds today? Scrape up the most you can. Here comes the freedom man, asking you to buy a share of freedom today.
At a certain point, even the most pig-headed, rah-rah war lover will snap out of beast mode when he realizes the government is taxing him and his family into poverty to fund the war. So the government has a challenge. Is there a way for it to take the wealth of the people without them knowing it?
Well, with a fiat currency, you can just debase the currency immediately without any of the citizens having a vote to pay for the war.
Он в клуб миллионеров записан как банкир. У них он научился рычать при слове «мир». Печатают газеты с бульдогом интервью. Бульдог в них излагает позицию свою. И вот уже он избран на выборах в Конгресс. Приятно ход событий, он как сенатор стал. Чего не может только наделать капитал.
Throughout history, statism has been imposed by an alliance of two groups. The state itself, the state apparatus, the king, the throne, and the opinion-molding groups, the intellectuals, which in most cases in history have been the churches. And so this is known as the alliance of throne and altar. You have the church and the state. The function of the church was to tell the people to obey the state. The state is God in many cases. The king is God, and the public believes them because they're the intellectual opinion molders. And in return for that, the church gets part of the boodle. They get part of the state revenue in the form of tax, subsidies, and so forth. In the early 20th century, we begin to reform the old alliance of intellectuals and government, big government intellectuals, perform the function of court apologists for the new regime.
It is a wonderful thing for our businessmen and our manufacturers and our unemployed to taste hope again. But they must not allow anyone to put them back in the gold cage.
What gold means, and this is something that Keynes was incapable of understanding because he never studied economics. It's not because it's yellow and shiny, and it's not because any of these things that he thought about it. What gold means is that economic value can only be acquired by creating value to others. And that's why in a hard money society everybody ends up working, doing productive things, because that's how you earn money, and that's the only way that you can make wealth. The alternative is that you have money that's easy to make, and central banks are able to make that, and they can make large quantities of it whenever they want. One section of society, government and people in government and people in the central bank, are able to effectively allocate value and wealth and economic resources, whereas everybody else has to work for it and earn it. And that's essentially a system of enslavement.
Breaking the dollar's peg to gold actually broke the intellectual character of our academic institutions. They're just no longer in reality. Keynesian economics purports that you can just print your way out of everything and government is omnipotent. Like in your textbooks, government is God. Just they don't suffer any opportunity costs, they can print money at will, they can change laws at will. It's a true delusion that we're living under.
Keynesian theories have made the subject of money feel so arcane to people that they feel like they just can't understand and they don't even want to try. These ideas are not new. It's just that before Keynesian ideology was at the forefront, they didn't call it inflation, they just called it coin clipping or theft.
Overall, if you compare societies, periods when money is expected to hold on its value, that will incentivize people to start thinking of the long term. The reason to hold money is to provide for the future, and the better the money is at holding its value for the future, the less uncertainty you have about the future, the more likely you are to think of the future, to account for the future, to provide for the future. And this is an economic decision, but it also reflects on all kinds of personal decisions. You look at savings rates since 1970 in the West, they've collapsed down to zero roughly. People don't really save anymore. In the 20th century, the silly statistic that people have obsessed about is consumption. It's just we need to get people consuming more. If we consume more, then GDP is up and then numbers are up. And if numbers are up, then everybody's happy and people get reelected. And so we've had this fixation of getting people to spend more, thinking of the level of spending as being the level of health, and that's just insane. If you sell your house and sell all of your stuff, sell all of your capital, sell your business, you can get your consumption up this month higher than it has ever been and spend it all on a big, massive party. Consumption numbers have gone up, you're rich. But, you know, what are you going to do next month? This is the incentive structure that fiat money and government supervision of the economy has incentivized. So you get these incentives that are rational, really, in this monetary system. It makes no sense to save money when your money is going to lose its value. Everybody borrows for their car, their home, their wedding. All of your major expenses you borrow in order to fulfill them.
Do you have money jitters? Ask the obliging Bank of America for a jar of soothing instant money, M-O-N-E-Y, in the form of a convenient personal loan.
Under a gold standard, it was different. People would save up money all their life. You know, as a child, you get born and you get given some money and you keep accumulating it. And then when you have a major expense, you bought it from your savings. In the current economy, money is the monetization of debt. Every time a bank issues a new loan, new money is being created, and so the money supply is being increased. And that's why this economy is so addicted to debt, because the institutions that issue debt are effectively printing new money. And therefore, you finance yourself from debt. And so now it makes sense to spend the money that you have to borrow and to pay off the debt because the money is losing its value.
We find a typical home occupied by a typical American family. Like millions of his fellow Americans, John Q. Public earns enough money to keep up the payments on a new car. He takes great pride in owning a fine, new, long-term mortgaged home that was built to last a lifetime.
When people have a low time preference, they're able to engage in long-term projects. When people have a high time preference, they can only think in terms of immediate gratification. And I think if you look at culture and art over the different periods, I think it's really hard to dismiss this. People like Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci and the masterpieces that they used to create when gold was money, you don't see things like that today. When you think about who are the major artists of the world today, but a bunch of idiots drawing a bunch of nonsense on a bunch of mattress that requires the level of skill that a 5-year-old could do. The entire freaking masterpiece takes 15 minutes to finish and then gets sold for $50 million. And then you look at Renaissance art, and every single one of those pictures took years of skill and mastery for the artist to be able to arrive at that. I don't think it's a coincidence that eras of unsound money produce this kind of degenerate art. People in this sort of society are unable to plan for the future and unable to think of the future. You can also see this with architecture. If you look around pretty much anywhere you travel in the world, the nice buildings were the ones that were built in the 19th century. And then the 20th century was the century of ugly industrial cookie-cutter boxes that cram the cities and traffic jams and ugly highways. The city's been destroyed by central planning, by high time preference government policies, and people's inability to think about the long term.
Yet another building site in the East End of London. An East End rebuilt almost out of recognition to those who knew it before the war.
Its form will respond, we hope, to the way people want to live now with their equipment, their domestic appliances, and their cars.
People don't like taxes. They see a clear connection between government expenditures and taxes. Let's say the government says, let's increase public pensions. To finance this, we just increase income tax. Many people that are wage earners will probably not like it very much, but if the government increases public pension and then finances this by issuing bonds, these bonds are then monetized. That is, the money supply is increased to buy these bonds, and then prices increase a little bit, then people will probably not make the connection.
Everyone, whether in the factory, shop, farm, or office, pays for the cost of government.
If there's economic growth, prices would actually fall. If the government is increasing spending, this can compensate for the fall in prices that would have occurred due to increases in productivity. The internet, new technology, or the increase in the division of labor. Thanks to the increase in government spending and the new debt and the monetization of the debt, prices don't fall, but stay the same or increase a little bit. So then people at the gas station will not say, oh, today I pay the same for my gas like last year, but if the government would not have increased government spending, now I could pay 10% less. And the cost of the government spending, if it's financed through the printing press, is hidden. People just don't make the connection between the government expenditures, the deficit, the issue of government debt, and the increase in prices, or the prices that are higher than they otherwise would have been.
The Cantillon effect is when you print and central bankers are providing more fiat, more liquidity into the system, they're doing it via financial assets.
The people who are benefited are indeed wealthy, but it's not specifically the wealthy people. It's more people who are friends with the money printers make money off the people who are not friends with the money printers. Because when you inflate the money supply, it's not Bernanke's helicopter where it just drops $100 bills on everyone. Money is printed and first handed to a specific industry or group of people that the government, Federal Reserve, and commercial bankers choose. Those people, because they now have more money, they get to benefit from the fact that the rest of the economy has not adjusted its prices to that new amount of money. And then by time that ripples all the way to people like you and I, we have to just bear the brunt of the higher prices.
And this is the thing about inflation. It's a wealth redistribution scheme. and you're taking from everybody else and giving it to yourself. There's something really wrong about that, right? You know, who are the people that you see saying silly things like hyperinflation is good for economies because it stops the concentration of wealth? They're the closest ones to the money spigot. They're the politicians. They're the intellectuals, the socialized intellectuals. Of course, they have reason to perpetuate this nonsense.
I don't like to speak hyperbolically, but I find it hard not to call this the greatest con in human history. I mean, they've been stealing vast swaths of our time, energy, effort, wealth, just by tweaking the money supply.
And now then, because we are introducing this amazing item for the first time in this country, it isn't going to cost you 1 cent. All you have to do is sign this little scrap of paper, and you get your bottle absolutely free.
I hereby turn over to ISM Incorporated everything I have, including my freedom and the freedom of my children and my children's children, in return for which said ISM promises to take care of me forever.
I call it monetary socialism. We as Americans pride ourselves on being free market capitalists, and will readily tell you that supply and demand should dictate the price of anything, right? Not essential planning authority for any commodity, any market in the world. But for some reason, we have this blind spot when it comes to the US dollar.
Stock prices jumped after the Federal Reserve dropped its discount rate. A slower rate of growth appears likely now that a tighter money policy has been confirmed by the Federal Reserve Chairman. The Federal Reserve approved the applications of 4 banks to offer some new financial services.
All they're doing is suppressing free market dynamics. The price of money is the interest rate. They're not letting the interest rate be naturally determined. Because a free market, it promulgates truth, right? In terms of the price, which is what does supply and demand say something is worth? And then what is the best tech for the job? So not only do we not know the price of money, they're not letting innovation occur.
When you are trying to play God and control the economy, the Fed is effectively like the wizard in the Wizard of Oz. Behind the curtain is just a person trying to pull all these levers because they believe that they know the economy and they can control the economy to their will.
You ungrateful creatures! Oh, pay no attention to that man behind the curtain!
Now, this is an affront to what we know about what the economy really is. It's a very organic process, and it's a very complex process. Monetary policy is actually the cause of these business cycles. So they don't understand that when you're back there pulling all those levers, you're actually setting the stage for these business cycles. You are creating a much more fragile system, and this is where black swans will kill you.
They've been able to violently and coercively control this market, shut down any competing business, stifle innovation, put people in prison with legal tender laws. There's such high enforcement costs. For the same mathematical reasons that Soviet Russia imploded, monetary socialism or central banking will implode as well.
Gold was so interwoven into our society for such a good reason. It was the best money because of its hardness, but gold has severe flaws. It was its physical locality that required us to use paper and all these other devices in order to scale it, and that was what led to us abandoning gold.
Once you were using financial instruments that were backed by gold, it gave the people who run these payment and settlement network an enormous amount of power and leverage over the control of gold. because it was much harder to keep track of how much gold there was, and people could issue more paper receipts than there is gold. You know, the temptation of taking over the central banks was too strong for governments. Governments took it over and then realized they could use it to finance wars. And since then, they have not been willing or able to give up the temptation of resorting to the printing press. The 20th century was the century of politicians, governments taking advantage of the printing press, voters being duped into thinking that this is a free lunch. There is something wrong with the gold standard, which is that governments can mess it up if they choose to. And it would be nice if we had something that was immune to the control of government.
It's conscious, like they know that underneath it all is the fact that they can't steal from people if they have to have sound money. That they know they are limited in how much wealth they can confiscate from the average person. The very survival of what is the political status quo, the very survival of what we think of as the role of government in society depends on not having sound money. This is going to be some of the most crazy times to be alive, to see the unraveling of all of this. There is a fight coming. What do you think they would be willing to do to save the very idea of government authority to manipulate what we do, to bail out their cronies and to give subsidies and contracts to all of their biggest donors, to buy votes? You won't have to work if things are tough. You don't have to produce. We'll pay you. And it's the evil producers that are keeping you poor. That sort of thing is the power to move the world. And when you've already shown that you're willing to
Check 1, 2.
I hate it when you just sit there and you're just like, I don't know what I want to do, but I need this.
Okay. All right. John, Stefan, can you hear us?
Hey, yep.
Awesome.
Oh, yeah. Hey, Stefan.
Yep, coming through loud and clear.
Hey, Todd.
Hey, guys.
Hello.
Hey.
Oh, no video for me yet. Let me turn my video on. Hold on. There we go.
Oh, yeah. Go general, and then technology is. Yeah. This is not. Screen lock. Yeah, no, just screen time. Yeah. Oh no, not screen time.
Okay.
Life is hard.
We'll edit this out in post.
Yeah, it'll look really snappy then, I'm sure.
Dude.
Maybe Mike knows. Mike, do you know how to take out the
How do I
screen
stop my phone from locking?
from locking up?
I don't know. I don't know how to stop my phone from locking. And it's
I
the
think
most simple
display- is
function.
it
My
display?
brain is not computing, and
Oh yeah, display and brightness, and then auto lock.
Obviously.
And then take out the auto lock into never.
All right. There you go. What?
Display and brightness, and then auto lock, and then never.
Oh. Okay.
Oh yeah, there you go.
No.
Because you did automatic, so.
You know what? It's fine.
Yeah.
Excellent.
All right.
Okay.
Cool. Yes, absolutely. So thanks everyone for coming to Bitcoin Meetup 2021 Adelaide. Is this the third meetup? First of the year in Adelaide. We are here today with myself, Paul Penendez. I've ran about 30 meetups over the course of the last 3 years, really trying to engage people and students are in Adelaide. We're here with Rusty, who, would you like to do your own intro? Or is that rude?
No,
Is that rude?
I don't know. Is it rude?
I don't know.
Or
I don't think
like
it is. I think it's
the
fine.
greatest Lightning developer in Adelaide.
You're pretty great. Yeah. And we have a guest, James.
Yes. G'day, guys. My name's James. Full-time athlete, and own a couple of businesses around town in Adelaide. And new to the crypto scene. And ever since Jose introduced me, so yeah, loving it.
Great, fantastic. Thanks for being here. So, we also have Stephen, of course. Stefan,
yeah. Hey, mate. Yeah, hey, guys. I'm Stefan Livera. I'm basically known as a Bitcoin podcaster and I interview Bitcoin people on my show. So that's basically what I'm known for.
Great. That's sick. And also,
He doesn't ask dumb questions. He asks quite sharp ones. So he's not just like a pretty boy face in front of the
No.
just there to bounce questions off people.
I assume that everyone's intelligent on this panel. I think.
Too kind, Rusty. Coming from the best Lightning developer in Adelaide.
Yeah. Maybe in Australia, maybe the world. I don't know. And we also have John from Perth. Nice.
From Sydney. Oh, unless there's another John from Perth that I'm not aware of.
No. Sorry.
Did we get the wrong John again? Embarrassing.
Always do.
You invited the wrong John, guys. John from Perth.
Where I go?
I'm kidding. We're done with it.
Yeah, hey guys. Yes, along with Stefan Livera and Chloe White, Hass McCook, and Harry Raab, we organised the Bitcoin Sydney meetups. I've been involved in the scene since about 2014. Fell down the rabbit hole mainly from an economic perspective. Had a tech background, but for me, Bitcoin was always much more enchanting based upon its game theory and economics. So that's been my main focus in what I like to talk about with Bitcoin anyway.
Cool. I have a question. How's the meetup community in Sydney at the moment? Is it buzzing a bit, or is it?
Yeah, we had our meetup last night. It was just a Bitcoin Sydney drinks, and we had about 40 or so. About 30 or 40, something in that range.
Yeah. And that was just drinks, no fancy dog and pony show with guests and panelists and all that sort of thing. I mean, it pulls obviously quite a few more when we do all of that. So we've been sort of pretty much consistently cranking out, at least 2 events a month now, and really building up a strong, pure Bitcoin scene, getting away from a lot of other states you might have seen, it's all mixed together with all this blockchain and crypto stuff. And one of the things that, again, why I was so pleased to work with Stefan on this is he had exactly the same idea when we came together back in early 2019. Let's just get the scene. Let's separate it out, have a clear delineation. Bitcoin is Bitcoin, not mixed up with all this crypto and blockchaining, which frankly, I think a lot of that crypto and blockchaining is a parody of what Bitcoin haters think Bitcoin really is. And they actually do it they actually do all that stuff as in crypto and blockchaining. And of course, Bitcoin is an entirely different phenomenon that makes, in my view anyway, a hell of a lot more sense.
Yeah, for sure. It's good to have that focus in the community, at least a niche within the community. So cool. Thanks for the intro, everyone. So what do we have?
It's product market fit though. It's really hard. It's actually quite hard to scam people with Bitcoin, but so if that's your angle, there's much more opportunity out there in that blockchain altcoin space.
Oh, exactly. Yeah,
it's kind of good. It's like everyone has a short-term focus, well, they can just go, they can go into altcoins or NFTs or Binance Chain or.
You pull that shit on Bitcoin and you get torn to pieces. That's what happens.
Yeah, you want to get wrecked. So you can just go over there and have your fun over there while we actually. And time and building stuff, right? So maybe, honestly, maybe Ethereum is doing a favor. Maybe, I'm being
like a lightning rod for.
Yeah, exactly.
Hopefully they'll get lynched by themselves and they'll distinguish us.
Yeah. Okay, so it's just, I think at the moment, obviously over the course of the last year with, I think, what was it? A week after the bottom from the Corona crash, you had that dude talking about we have infinite capacity to print money. What was the exact quote? Like, we have either infinite capacity to print money or we have infinite money.
I think he said we've got an infinite amount of cash in the Federal Reserve, and I forgot the guy's name now. Actually, I could look it up, but he's like one of the Federal Reserve lead senior people. He's one of the senior.
He was guys. Like a local. Was he a local? I don't think he was like the full country nationwide Fed chairman. He's like more of a local one, wasn't he? Is that not that it makes much difference, but
I think it was head of the Fed for a particular state.
Yeah.
But I remember seeing
Neil Kashkari for Minneapolis. Yeah,
right.
Kashkari. Yeah.
And his eyes were so wide open, it freaks me out. I'm like, he's really serious. He really meant infinite. And I don't think humans understand what infinite is. We don't have the capacity.
Oh, we will.
Oh, no, we will. We're seeing it right now. And obviously, ever since we had an M2 money supply average expansion of 2% a month? It's right now, it's 2% a month, isn't it? Around about?
At least.
At least, right? So, we're having, all asset prices. So we're having inflation in asset prices rather than general goods. All the commodities are going up. It's just interesting to see how 10 years ago, when, 11 years ago, no. 2008, when was that? 13 years ago. Obviously the GFC was a backdrop for the creation of Bitcoin. It's interesting how we've kind of, the origination of Bitcoin has, the purpose of the origination of Bitcoin is kind of come into full circle. So do you want to explain a bit more about how you see the general start of Bitcoin and how it's happening now?
Oh, okay. Yeah. Bitcoin comes from this long attempt to build a digital cash. So from a technical point of view, it was an iteration on a whole of previous ideas. We had cryptography. We had this idea that you can have this secret key and this public key, and you can sign things, and all these pieces were there. And Satoshi Nakamoto's, obviously we don't know who Satoshi Nakamoto is, but that was the name the author chose. Dropped this paper that described proof of work, which basically was a way of coordinating this digital currency in a decentralized way. And that was really the breakthrough. But it's built up on a lot of previous breakthroughs. But there are some really interesting things there in the details. So, the decision. So obviously, if you're building a currency like this, and it's supposed to be decentralized, not controlled by anyone, you've got to figure out your issuance schedule, right? So there are kind of a couple. You can't have a central bank in a system like this. If somebody has the ability to control how fast or slow money is printed, then that's centralization. So you've got to pick a number.
Yeah.
And Satoshi chose 0. You got to print something to begin with. You got to launch it somehow. But he's like, we're just going to halve every 4 years until it's down to 0, which is a really interesting decision. Most people might have gone, okay, well, we'll taper it down to 1% a year, like standard classical inflation kind of theory. And to be fair, Bitcoin isn't there yet. Bitcoin's inflation rate is now, I think.
Is it less than 1% now?
No, I think it's still 2%. I mean, We're still in
It's
small
decreasing,
percentages.
yeah.
So we're still in that sort of inflationary phase, but we're definitely getting down to the harder end of it. And it was a really interesting decision, and that was kind of overlooked at the time. I mean, it's like, so in 2140, it's going to fall to zero, whatever. Although being exponential, right, it definitely hits and you feel it before then. And it was interesting because while this was something that was known and it's set in the code and it's kind of stuck there, the emphasis on it and the really understanding what that means is something that's kind of only really got the spotlight in the last 4 or 5 years, I would say. And and part of that is it's a very simple message: 21 million bitcoins. Everyone knows how many bitcoin there will be. 21 million. Now, actually, it's slightly less than that because some have been burned already and some have been wasted, and a crap load have been lost. But everyone knows that 21 million headline number. So in some ways, it was brilliant because you can go, right, we're only ever going to do 21 million. So if this thing's going to be huge, pick your moon. I can divide that number by 21 million, or and tell you what one Bitcoin will be worth for me. Perhaps I should get a Bitcoin. And these days you can go, well, it's 21,000 trillion sats. You can do it on a sat level. Well, whatever you do, you've got this fixed number, and it's a really easy benchmark. So it's been interesting to see that change, this idea of hard money becoming a much more mainstream idea than it was in 2008 when it was perhaps a little bit radical. I mean, people might have been saying, GST is a bit crazy, maybe we should limit inflation. The idea of dropping it to zero and basically having it effectively a deflationary currency was really something at the time that I think was quite radical.
I think also now everyone has having first-hand experience seeing asset prices like kind of hyperinflate in a way. Like the currency, like the commodities and goods and services aren't hyperinflating, but asset prices are hyperinflating. So now people are questioning like, this is ridiculous. Like they're seeing proof of the original idea popping up, and it's like, okay, like this is clearly something. So now it's the forefront of, I guess, the human psyche at the moment. So. It's really interesting.
Property prices certainly is just gone pretty eye-watering recently. This is a good chance to throw over to Stefan because he's definitely this is definitely in his ballpark.
Absolutely.
It comes down to thinking about what is the asset inflation going on, and most Australians and just people around the world are not cognizant of this yet. Right? We are just that kind of freak person who, that 1% kind of person who's actually thinking about this. Now, more and more people around the world are starting to think about this. But just fundamentally, it's like that point that, Michael Saylor would say that, if you leave that money in the bank account, you're losing probably 15% per year. In the developed world, something like 15% per year is the value you are losing on average. And in like developing countries, it's even worse than that. So, that's the whole, I think that part, and 2020 changed a lot of things for a lot of people, and now they're starting to properly think about these things. And now, they are starting to think of it more like, hey, this is how I can save my value.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's just one thing that I find, for example, Turkey banned crypto recently, didn't they?
They passed a law banning its use for payments. Which is really interesting. At least that was the reports that I read.
It's just like, it's kind of like if people have the intuition to buy Bitcoin, then they do. And let's just say you're in a poor country. But I think the problem still is that Bitcoin should exist and be able to function for someone without them even needing to take the step to and having the intuition to buy it. You know what I mean? Like there's so many people out there that don't either have the capacity and not aware of it, or don't have the capacity to and not benefiting from it. And so I feel like, ideally, I guess in a maybe utopian world, or maybe just in an ideal world, like everyone could have access to it in some way. So I don't know, that doesn't sound very capitalist.
Strike is probably a good example, right? So if you know Jack Mallers, I interviewed him recently on my show, and he's probably a good example of this, right? So he's making this app, it's called Strike, and it allows people to pay with fiat, but the person on the other end is actually just getting paid, or can get paid, in Bitcoin and Lightning. So that's one example of this. And it's probably... It might be fair to say that, longer term, a lot of people will be using Bitcoin without necessarily even knowing it. Like they're just, it's like the rail on which the money and the value can transfer. So that's one way to think about it.
That's great. Yeah. He's doing great work, Jack Miles.
Yeah. But the other thing is like, so if you feel that way, you should hold some Bitcoin for your friends
and family, maybe.
Yeah. Just like stash some, and don't freaking give it to them because they'll sell it, right? But just don't even tell them it's there. Right?
You know what's frustrating?
Surprise them in 10 years that you put some sats away for them.
When people like come to me and it's like, what should I buy? Like in the last 2 weeks, I've had like 20 people ask me like, what am I buying? I'm like, okay, like it's fine, like I'm gonna help you. But it's always kind of, the only thing you can do is just say, just buy this and just don't try to recommend anymore. You know what I mean? Because otherwise you get in trouble. It's just like, because then they're asking me, okay, so I'm buying now. What am I saying? Well, I don't know. Like, don't sell it. Just buy it and just forget about it. Like, imagine you've just lost it. But we haven't lost it, but just keep it in the exchange wallet or whatever, because you can't even trust people to have a hardware wallet. I can't even tell my friends to get hardware. It's just too difficult.
The thing, let me jump in here. I think one thing you got to think about is people, I've got examples of this, right? Like when I started, like most people, when you first come into Bitcoin, you're like constantly telling everyone you can about Bitcoin. Now I've got people out there who, I told them to buy back in like 2013, and some of them did, but then because they hadn't gone through and like done the learning, they didn't hold it. They sold it. And so that's like for some people, some of them managed to kind of hold by accident because they left it on some exchange and then they came back to it, last year or this year. Now they're like, oh, wow, I bought it in 2013 and now it's like this, So, some people are lucky like that, but a lot of them end up selling because they haven't been taught exactly what the value of what they were holding. And it's similar because people nowadays think, oh yeah, look, some OG who got some coins back in 2011 or 2012, but the reality is so many of them sold on the way up. Unless you had a very strong thesis about this, how are you going to hold above a 10x? Most people would be like, wow, 10x, I'm selling.
That's the thing. I mean, unless you understand the fundamental why Bitcoin is valuable in the first place, why would you hold what essentially appears, if you don't know that, to be a bunch of magic beans? That's what people who don't know anything about the way the fiat money system works and about the way Bitcoin works and the value proposition it brings in contrast to that, that's what they basically think you've gone and bought. For me, that was the most important thing, because I had already, even before I heard of Bitcoin, had always been skeptical and always was curious about how the mainstream fiat money system worked. And no explanation I saw was ever really satisfactory or seemed sustainable. And not to mention, of course, there have been sort of numerous, I wouldn't say conspiracy theory videos, but videos that have a bit of that look to them, but were actually turned out to be very sensible, that explained the inconsistencies and irrationality of the fiat money system. So when you saw something like Bitcoin come along, and then you suddenly saw there were all of these people who had exactly the same questions and concerns about the fiat money system that I had. And then here was this thing that addressed all of those concerns, then that immediately right there was the value proposition. I didn't need the technical considerations about exactly, the details of how it worked. The fact that it did work and was what mattered. And I think that's as well as another interesting point I wanted to add to some comments of Rusty's earlier on about the economic policy, is that Satoshi Nakamoto got it right from the very beginning. There was no economic policy on the run like you've seen with a lot of altcoins. I know, for example, a year or two back, Stellar they just decided overnight to burn a whole bunch of tokens to make them more scarce, so that suddenly, obviously, the ones remaining would be more valuable. And then, of course, there's the absolute joke that is economic policy or monetary policy that is Ethereum. I think someone put a graph out recently showing that the emission rate of it was all up and down with all these ad hoc things they keep coming up with and bunging on to change the emission rate, and how many, still no one knows, I think, how many coins there are ever going to be. And then you had this perfectly predictable and smooth Bitcoin rate that was set right from the start, and everyone who's tried to second guess it in the 10 years and has tried their own thing has suddenly figured out when it failed, oh, this guy somehow without experimentation got it right back in 2009. It's quite amazing. It's almost like the guy must have been a time traveler.
Yeah. So, I mean, you've also got to understand the motivations there, right? So the motivation for Bitcoin was to produce an electronic cash. The motivation for every coin since then has been to take your cash. And these are fundamentally different, right? So in the former case, it was obvious to Satoshi. Obviously, it had to have a policy that was nailed in stone from the beginning. I mean, you're making promises to people about the future. It's got to be in the protocol. It's got to say what it's going to do. It shouldn't be something that you can change. That just seems fundamental and obvious. But if you're the one making benefits from the ability to change it, then that's a very different system. And that, I think, is the key of what the difference is between Bitcoin and everything else.
Absolutely. I've seen some commentary on Twitter recently saying this bull market's different, this time's different, and I hate every time I hear that. I laugh, right? Because human psychology is so bloody predictable. Like, humans are pathetic, honestly. I'm a human, so I'm pathetic too. But I definitely am seeing this time different, and it is because infinite, like so much money has been printed. M2 multiplier once again is increasing 2% per month. That is a pretty convincing argument to say that asset prices are going to continue to go up unless monetary policy from the Fed changes, right? So do people think that this time is different?
God. Yeah, I mean, I'm with you with the same wincing every time. This time is different. Like every time there's a bull market in anything, there's always someone who comes out and here's the reason this bull market is sustainable
Straight
forever,
up.
right? It's going straight up.
Never go up.
You kind of twitch immediately, going, "Oh, okay, how rigorous is that?" And Dan, I like bear markets. We get so much shit done.
For sure.
People go away, and we get to do stuff, right? So I'm always a bit conflicted about that. And there's the other thing is, frankly, most of us are still stacking sats, and so at that point, you're like, can the bull market just hold off a while longer, right? So I guess most Bitcoiners are a little bit conflicted about the whole going hyperbull. And at some point you go, well, that's it. I will never be able to afford a whole Bitcoin.
Yeah,
that sucks. Kind of thing. But the whole idea that it's different this time, there definitely does seem to be a backdrop. There are definitely a different flavor of people coming in.
100%.
Now, is that good for Bitcoin in the long term? It depends on whether they completely drown out what Bitcoin is. I mean, if the economic majority of Bitcoiners are not Bitcoiners, that's a problem.
Well, it's clear not all retail. I mean, obviously, like 8 or 9 different corporations in the US have got Bitcoin in their balance sheets now, which wasn't happening 3 years ago. So there's that. And obviously the backdrop of money printing is different. So obviously you don't think this time's different, right?
I'm hesitant to make that call. It does. Okay, there are a lot of things about this.
Things are definitely different. Yeah,
a lot of things about this are different. Is it?
Things were different the other times as well. I mean, that's the thing. It's tempting to think like every time, like whether it was 2013 or 2017, even then I know the thought process that went on. We thought the hyper Bitcoinization is upon us. This is it. And you could even then reference things that were genuinely different then than they were on previous periods. But the fact that these things are different now merely explains why this bubble, when you mentioned, for example, corporate balance sheet adoption, well, that only explains why this bubble happens to be $57,000 or wherever it gets to. Hopefully it'll get to $100,000 or $200,000 and not merely $1,200 or $20,000. So yes, of course, things are going to be different. The question is, are they different enough for this to be the last bull run and not have, possibly a 70% pullback the next time? And
yeah, I would put money on there being. Right?
Oh, for sure.
This is not hyper Bitcoinization yet, right? We might see some prelude of it, but we're definitely. People said to me, "Oh, but these CFOs, these are serious investors. They're not going to like panic like retail." And I'm like, "They're going to panic exactly. They're going to fucking panic exactly like retail, man."
They are speculating. People are saying
some of the early ones are absolutely like, okay, we think this is a good reserve currency, et cetera, et cetera. The ones who jump on later will be all about the gains, right?
For sure.
And they'll jump on too late. They'll jump up because it's going up crazy, and they have shareholder pressure, everyone yelling at them to buy this. Well, with the same shareholders yelling at them to sell the fucking thing as it's a falling knife, right? Yeah. So, you will see exactly the same kind of panic sell reaction on the other side, and we'll get the Bitcoin is dead thing, and we'll all be quiet for 3 years. I mean, Bitcoin might be dead at $250,000, but the point is, having peaked at 500 and gone back down, right? We are still in this cyclical phase, and I don't think we're going to see this super cycle thing happen.
I'm kind of with Rusty as well. Like, okay, if I had to make the argument, right, the super cycle or the final cycle argument, it would be something like, look, we are just reaching a level where, let's say, we're going to cross that threshold, as it were, right? We're going to go from, theoretically, the idea is that there's just going to be that many new people coming in to, buy this thing that we're just not going to see that big 80% drawdown like we have seen multiple times historically. And I would say, personally, I'm still stacking sats hard, but I'm anticipating an 80% pullback at some point. So I'm mentally readying myself for that. And I would, I recommend people be ready for that, because you don't want to be just buying this thing and kind of blindly, kind of following. Because sometimes what happens, and from people who've been there before, people get too bullish in the bull market and too bearish in the bear market, right? It's like, it's just our emotions, and it's just like how we think about these things. So high level, the way I'm seeing this is there will be, of course, I think there's way more upside left to go in this kind of run, if you will, in this kind of broader cycle. But I think at some point, it will be that we don't have enough of a, quote unquote, dollar cost average army who are stacking sats all on the way up. And at some point, it will just like the momentum will just be too much, and there won't be enough DCA army people to kind of hold that floor. And whether that floor is, 250,000 or 800,000, I don't know.
Cool.
But I think at some point we'll reach like kind of that point, and then we're going to do it'll crash. And here's the other one. The government could sort of say, look, we're going to we can't stop Bitcoin, but we're going to try to regulate and stop it. Or maybe the US government comes out with something to try and put the brakes on this thing. And it sort of it doesn't kill Bitcoin. It just slows it down. And we wait for another 2 or 3 years before we, hit the next halving in mid 2024 and probably the next bull run in 2025. That's my guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So right now, I think, what was it, last month or 2 months ago, the first ETF in Canada was released. And I think very quickly, within a week or two, like 20,000 Bitcoin was bought up, which also correlated with the amount of Bitcoin on Grayscale going down. Or was it that the premium went down? I don't quite remember. But
I don't think Grayscale can sell any. I think they're a trust and they're locked.
No, I think the premium went down.
The premium has tanked.
Yeah,
it went from like
tanked
plus
like 2 months
30%
ago.
to like minus 15.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're definitely seeing ETFs in at least one country happening. Well, I don't know. Obviously, you're going through Twitter randomly, and obviously it popped up, right?
Sorry, I'm just horrified that I actually know that stat.
It's obviously, well, you're smart.
No, but I'm technical. I'm not. I don't. This finance side.
No, you learn subconsciously, right? You don't have to
Yeah.
Anyway, so but it's there's like 8 pending ETFs at the moment in America, but it's still not going through. Why is that the case? Clearly, there's appetite. There's been appetite for years. What's going on? Is there a pedal? Is there backroom talk saying we're going to regulate the shit out of this and don't improve? Like, does anyone have any ideas of what's going on?
I think they're buying their time. They want to be conservative. They're probably going to push it out to the end. And one of the guys who's close on this is Jake Shavinsky, and he's commented that if they're going to approve it, it's probably going to be like November time-ish, right? For this,
right.
That's what he was saying. And he's like a Bitcoin lawyer guy. And so he's actually much more closely, an expert on this and like connected in the right circles. So I would kind of look at what he's saying as probably a better indicator of if we're gonna get the ETF this cycle, it's gonna happen towards the end of this year. Otherwise, we might have to wait for the next cycle.
Yeah, because if one's not approved, then of course people are looking for proxies, which is they're buying stocks of corporations that bought Bitcoin, right? Which is what's happened in MicroStrategy. And then they're also buying mining stocks as well, because that's some weird complex exposure to Bitcoin. Because obviously it's not just holding Bitcoin, you get exposure to mining, right? But people are buying all these corporations trying to get exposure. So,
but people understand mining. They think they do. They understand the word. They know that mining can be profitable in a gold rush, and so they're like, therefore, mining will profitable. There's a certain, and it's not wrong, but there's a certain simplicity. Like, okay, buy shares in a mining company because that makes sense because they're mining bitcoins. And they may think they're out there speculating for prospecting for bitcoins. It doesn't matter what they think. They've got this. They're mining for bitcoins. Therefore, that makes sense.
Obviously, they're smart.
And that's
price
not
can go up.
That's not a dumbest thing to do.
But to be honest, it actually works. So if you actually look at the Bitcoin miners, some of them,
if you can get them.
Oh, yes. Right. But it's going up more than Bitcoin. It's the speculations there. It's just like when people invest in gold miners, right? You invest in gold miner's going up, you buy gold miners and same because you think the price is going to go higher, right? So it's just interesting to see that play out. It is the discount on Grayscale at the moment is quite interesting.
Well, I think the premium was interesting, and that obviously couldn't last, right? So it was running at 30%.
No.
So Bitcoin, Grayscale Trust, they're a Bitcoin trust. They basically they buy Bitcoin in their trust and they sell shares, and so you're basically indirectly owning Bitcoin. But the price you were paying above the actual value of the Bitcoin they held was about 30%. So it was a significant premium, and that existed for various reasons. And one of the reasons was this was one of the few ways that you could get exposed to Bitcoin's price, buy Bitcoin, so to speak, through like a normal stockbroker kind of deal. So that explained the premium. But with recent competition from various other places, they've returned to what apparently is sort of an industry normal for these kind of trust fund things, where you can't get the things back out. They often trade at like 10 to 15% below the value of the assets that they hold.
Right.
So apparently this is basically returned to normal somewhat. But there are certain things they can do to take advantage of that price, apparently. So, and if they turn to an ETF, it'll get much closer to to NAV, so much closer to the total value that they hold will pretty much be the value of the company kind of thing. But they are a weird structure because they can't do an ETF, so they're kind of a weird trust structure. But yeah, and so this explains so there was this honeymoon period where BlockFi and Ledn and all these places were offering like 6%, and apparently a lot of the trade was going to lending Bitcoin out to people who were whales, who would take the Bitcoin, sell it to GBTC in return for fresh GBTC shares, sell those shares, those 6-month lock-in, but 6 months later they could sell the GBTC shares, take their 30% profit, pay back the interest, and keep doing that loop. Now that loop is broken and suddenly no more 6% interest for anyone, it's all down to 2%. So that's the only reason I happen to know.
Market efficiency, right?
Yeah. It was never going to last. 6% was ridiculous.
Yeah, sure, of course. So how would countries in general, like not just Australia, but countries in general, benefit if their central bank held Bitcoin reserve currency? Because right now, like not even Australia holds gold, right? Their gold's in London.
Well, no, we don't hold any gold.
We don't hold any gold?
But we do. It's just all on the ground, right? So
yeah.
I mean, think about it. We do actually hold gold. So we don't
you can actually look. I mean, whether you believe it or not, but the Australian Reserve Bank does actually have a published sheet online that says exactly how much. I think it's like $4 billion worth of gold or something like that they claim is on their asset sheet. But that might be as good as no gold in the whole context of things.
Yeah,
it's like
I'm surprised they have 4. No, there you go.
Yeah. It's just
find the link somewhere.
Yeah, with all the money printing that's happening, it's hard to see how a federal bank is going to be able to, like, we're so used to printing so much money and being able to get away with that, and how the system operates. How would you transition to saying, "Oh, we're going to buy Bitcoin to back our reserves"? I mean, you can't, because you're just printing. You can't catch up, right?
The trick is that if everyone's going to do it, you definitely want to be first.
Oh, 100%.
Right.
Because it'll just skyrocket.
But by the time you know everyone's going to do it, you're not first anymore.
Yeah.
And so there is a game of chicken, and I don't think this cycle is going to be the one that sees this flip.
It's definitely probably 10 years away. Probably.
So the safest equilibrium point in whatever you call it in game theory would be for states to actually get some Bitcoin just in case, because the worst case scenario is that they get Bitcoin before other states do, and therefore that's the worst case. The neutral case is that sort of everyone gets it, and of course the best case is that state gets it first. So. Yeah, why would you risk getting left behind?
Bitcoin, what it does is it offers you a honeymoon period on your capital gains that would, instead of being 25% or 24%, it'll be 10% flat if you pay it in Bitcoin today. And that will guarantee you against any future capital gains. That's how you take 10% of everyone's Bitcoin in Australia.
Is that a proposition?
So the proposition is normally, like, if you sell Bitcoin, you'll pay capital gains. It'll work out to about 24% long-term capital gains. You offer a special rate where you pay us 10% of your Bitcoin now. You will never pay capital gains on that Bitcoin ever. You've paid it. You're done. Right? By giving people that discounted rate, you can accumulate quite a lot of Bitcoin from your citizens. Also, there's a bad side that you can also find out how much Bitcoin, who owns what Bitcoin. So there's all kinds of dark reasons. But if the state wants to accumulate a significant reserve of Bitcoins, if the citizens have a significant reserve of Bitcoins, there are a way they can do it that are not ridiculous, but basically giving them a tax break on it, that would allow them to fairly rapidly accrue a significant number of Bitcoins. And the Australian citizens do hold a reasonable amount of Bitcoin. So, if they really wanted to accumulate reserves. The same theory of we hold gold, it's just all in the ground. We hold Bitcoin, it's just all held by the citizens.
Yep.
Has that been done in the past, that what we were talking about? I'm not, no. You asked if it's been done in the past or anything. I don't believe it has. The standard way is to just confiscate it all, right? I mean, the whole gold confiscation going, no, we'll give you fair rates as we define fair rates for it today, but you can't keep it, which is a far more draconian way of doing the same thing, of mining your citizens for the asset. But there are definitely, there are midpoints in there that I think could be win-win in theory. So with those modifiers, you don't necessarily need to be first because you've already got something of an edge.
Yes, I agree. We had a question?
Oh, that was it. The answer.
Oh, sorry. Clearly I zoned out. We are seeing, I think, what was it? At least one super fund in New Zealand who's now allocated, 5% in Bitcoin? Is that correct?
I think they allocated 1% and they got 5%.
Really?
Good.
Oh, yeah.
Number go up, right?
Number go up, yeah. So there is a precedent for super funds to have some allocation. I don't know how big that super fund is. It might be quite a niche, some progressive folk who, have control. Maybe it's like a new fund or whatever. But we are definitely seeing, exposure. And for retirement, it makes a lot of sense, right? People to allocate in Bitcoin. Clearly, most of the market, traditional finance is not doing that.
But okay, so this is the context, right? So with returns dropping on safe assets, investment places, anyone doing this long term is having to look at more and more risk assets.
Absolutely.
So they're going, oh well, we'll put 5% of our stuff in risk assets. What are risk assets? And they kind of and that trickles into your whole business. But so it's not too hard for them to go, okay, well look, of that 5%, some small amount will go into Bitcoin because all these asymmetric return reasons, right? We consider it high risk, high volatility, but it's a small exposure. So it actually isn't too hard for them to kind of do that kind of move. What's interesting is that that exposure was last year, and we only found out about it through the normal reporting cycle later on. So different structures require different reporting cycles. So we might not know. I would assume after 12 months we'd have a good idea, but there'd be lots of things that drop, and we find out that 6 months ago they bought Bitcoin.
I'm very interested to see, depending on when they're allocated, or when they actually purchase, when eventually we have the bear market, to see how that. Obviously, the idea is that they're bought and never going to sell, right? So I'm just interested to see that dynamic, to see how opinion is considered with super funds allocation. I'm going to assume that we're going to go much higher than the bear market isn't going to be that bad. So it could be that some late super funds might come back to cost even, right? So because what I'm trying to say is that if a super fund were to allocate Bitcoin, they'd be at a significant loss. I know it's only 1% or 2% or whatever, but it still could be a pull for commentary to say don't do it, right?
Well, if they buy at the top, sure, but the ones on the way up will sell to balance their portfolio. I mean, that is their benefit, right? They're in the very much
the risk is
until we have a fund that is like all Bitcoin all the way, right? The hyper Bitcoinization fund that is like that's all we're keeping, like a MicroStrategy style thing. Yeah. Until then, it'll be this is some agreed percent of our assets, and if it goes above that, they will just sell it out.
Yeah.
So their exposure is limited. So on the bear market, their exposure will also be limited.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's going to be hard to bitch and moan about the loss they took in the bear market if they reaped it, all the way up in the bull market. So I don't think they'll freak out. I mean, it's a high volatility asset, and anyone who tells you something other than that is selling you something, right? Yeah. So they are definitely aware of that, right? And I don't think anyone believes that is over. I mean, even here we don't believe that's over, right?
It's not over, definitely not. We are seeing Bitcoin enter other industries like the sports industry. So James, I'd be interested to hear about your commentary about how you think that Bitcoin can enter the sport industry and help, people who are participating in it. For example, people are now wanting to take some wages in Bitcoin in the NFL, etc., which is quite interesting.
Absolutely. Yeah, so I think it's an interesting space, and I think for a lot of athletes themselves, unless they come from a background where, for me, before I was a full-time athlete, I owned a gym. So I had something to fall back on, whereas a lot of people that are getting into sport now and are playing, they're usually coming from ground roots. So once they come from that era, if they haven't, either done a trade or they haven't had exposure to business or they haven't had exposure to investing, making this more mainstream for them, I guess allows them to kind of safeguard themselves for when they do retire, they actually have something to fall back on. And I think the exciting thing about it is looking at it for what it is now, where it's come from, and what it could be in the future. And if they do it right, and as you said, they don't just sell when it 10x's and they hold on to it and figure out ways that they can, either live on a particular wage, learn against what they have in Bitcoin, never sell, keep hold of it. But obviously it has to become mainstream. They have to learn the right things. And I think for me, I'm very, very, very new to this. Like I'm still in its very infancy. This is my first bull run, and just kind of piqued my interest after going overseas and getting involved with some bobsled, and then eventually getting on board with some people that were involved overseas. It kind of sparked my interest. So from there, I think it's pretty exciting, and it's also exciting in terms of what it could turn into, especially with new things popping up. Obviously, what happened back in 2017 with the ICOs, and now it's like NFT crazes, and what that could do for athletes in long-term future, especially if NFTs go crazy and that, you know, digital asset does go mental, you know, you could potentially see athletes, you know, gaining payments way into their 70s when their digital artwork is
getting
on
wrecked.
and on and on.
Like if they license it out, stuff like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, the sort of the digital baseball card model kind of makes some degree of sense, right?
Yeah.
Whether any of that money will go to the artists is, of course, like whether that will be captured by the the middleman is like a really interesting question. And the cynic in me says, if there's a lot of money to be made in the long term, but somehow it never quite makes it to the person. But yeah, so certainly fascinating.
Absolutely. It's just a comment. Like just the NFT craze is crazy. It's so interesting when you've been a part of the industry for so long. Every single time you see the mania, and every time it happens, you just freak out. You're like, what the fuck? like you've seen it so many times. Like, how are you surprised? But it's just every time, like my mind explodes. Like,
oh, but that said, NFTs on Liquid are cool. Just so you know.
Oh yeah, we get into that. We get into that very, very soon. So, Rusty, we know you've been working on Lightning for quite a while now. Would you mind doing a very short introduction, and then maybe give us an update on current developments and what you're really excited about at the moment, or what's coming soon?
Wow. Okay. So everyone's talked about, and this is as I said before, like there's this whole hard money. This is a savings technology kind of Bitcoin thing that's come out now. Is, you know, it's fascinating because it's not what I do for a day job, right? I work for Blockstream. I was the first person to implement the Lightning protocol, and there are multiple implementations of it. We have standards and all that stuff. And Lightning is all about the other problem, which is how do you spend your Bitcoin in an efficient way, right? How do we send it around? And for me, that was always the interesting question. Like Bitcoin's incredibly secure, but the destiny of Bitcoin is to be really expensive. That's because for Bitcoin to work, everyone on the network basically is checking every single transaction. We make it really, really hard to update the Bitcoin ledger, and we do that by making miners do a crap load of work. It's always going to be really incredibly expensive to run by design, right? That means in the long run, without inflation, the people paying for it are going to be the people doing transactions. So this has been known since the beginning, right? It was in the code from day one, like 12 years ago. So this destiny was always written. And then the question was, okay, so what can we do? And Satoshi talked about a whole heap of technologies that could be done where you could basically make multiple payments with only one on-chain transaction. And there was some early support for this. And then there was this great paper that dropped, the Lightning paper 6 years ago now, that described a system where we could not only have these channels, you just set up a transaction and you start sending Bitcoin across it, but that you could build up this network of channels so that, sure, I'd have a channel with you and I could pay you lots of times, but that's only kind of interesting. But if you've also got a channel with him, then I can actually trustlessly use you and you charge a small fee to route through to him and stuff like that. And you build that, you get a network. And that is the Lightning Network, this idea. We kind of have it, we're anchored on the Bitcoin network. So if everything screws up, you're literally holding a Bitcoin transaction that gives you your money back. And at that point, you pay your fees and you get your money back, right? You go on the Bitcoin network. But until something goes wrong or the other person tries to cheat you, you just transact normally. And they don't want to cheat you because it's so expensive to go on chain and enforce things anyway. And it's slow. Whereas Lightning payments are really fast. And it's been really interesting because I've been working on this for 6 years now. And occasionally I get to use the Lightning Network for something cool, but I actually need to spend some Bitcoin recently. And the reason was that I had a tip jar, and it always said if Bitcoin ever hits 50K, I'm going to buy myself a decent coffee machine, like a really good espresso machine. It's $4,000 Italian. Oh, superb. Anyway, because I have these, the Lightning spec meetings are at 5:30 a.m. Adelaide time. And so I really need my coffee machine. And so I was always like, if this happens, then that tip jar, this is the contribution it's going to make. It is going to buy me that coffee machine. So it obviously happened. I went, crap, now I've got to buy the coffee machine. And I need to sell some Bitcoin. And what was fascinating is that I had an associate who wanted to buy some Bitcoin. And I ended up sending it in like $1,000. There was a couple of things, but $1,000 at a time over the Lightning Network. And that was great because given that fees were about $30 at the time, and my Lightning Network fees worked out to... it was in sats anyway, so it was under a cent to send that kind of money, if I recall correctly. Like it was ridiculously easy, and it just worked. And I'm like, wow, That is just amazing. So being able to instantly send globally something like that around the world is kind of cool. And it's completely different because we're talking about store of value and all this hard currency and stuff like that. But there's also this other side of us kind of going, hey, we can actually use this for real payments in like a really cool way. And I feel at the moment like we're kind of going, we exist too, right? Everyone's really hyped about the store of value and all this stuff. But on the other hand, we're kind of early, right? The main problem with Bitcoin is it's not the currency everyone's got in their wallet. Well, store of value fixes that. So we will be ready by the time everyone's like, well, I'd like to buy the dip, but I actually don't have any fiat because I'm all in a Bitcoin. Those people will need to like pay their rent and they'll need to do other things. And at that point, the Lightning Network is ready for them, right? If you've got Bitcoin, the Lightning Network gives you the ability to send it really fast. And for me, that's really exciting. Technically, there's a whole heap of cool stuff coming up. We're continually revving with user experience and stuff like that. Some cool protocol things. At the moment, I'm working on Offers, which is this really great way of basically having this. It does things like recurring payments for you really well, which is nice. You can say, cool, this is payment once a day, stuff like that. It's draft protocol spec at the moment. I have an implementation. The way the spec works is you've got to have 2 interoperable implementations before it gets finalized. So I'm looking forward to someone else implementing it. And we keep revving it. So there's a problem in the Lightning Network. When things break down and you have to go on chain, that payment that was going through gets stuck. Right. And there's also a delay involved. So you could be making a payment and the monkey in between you, who you don't know, because it's all anonymous, goes down. Now that sucks for them, but it also sucks for you because your payments are stuck. And you're like, well, it still could, in theory, go through. So if you've agreed to pay a vendor something, you're like, well, do I try paying it again and risk that I'm double paying or not? And so there was recently, in addition to the Offers spec, where you can basically go to the vendor, okay, cool, I want you to give me another invoice, but I want you to cancel the old one. And basically the invoice is assigned, so you can do that. And then you pay the new one because the old one's stuck. And if they are an asshole and they take the old payment, you've literally got a signed promise from them that they will not do this.
Right.
Now you're already trusting the vendor usually to some extent anyway, because they're going to ship you the stuff. Right. You're paying them, you're hoping they're going to actually ship it. So you've already got some kind of thing there usually. In this case, you can go, hold on. I've got 2 payment receipts, and here's the payment receipt saying you promised you cancelled the first one and you lied. So that gives you some assurance. You could always choose to wait it out, but it does give you some assurance that you can literally contact the vendor, cancel that, your wallet, because your wallet will do all this, cancel it and get a fresh one and pay that one. And if that one fails, you could cancel, etc. But it's a very rare thing, but when it happens, it's annoying because your funds could be stuck for 2 days.
Well, this is a mechanism of like cancelling a payment, right?
Yeah.
Which is so important because Bitcoin you can't. Once you send, it's gone. Right? If there's a disagreement, like I've seen so much commentary saying, "Oh, using Bitcoin payments is crap because you can't retrace your payment, right? You can't." But
Oh, yeah, we have refunds too. So for Offers, you create a key. So the thing about the Lightning Network is it's relatively anonymous. It's not as anonymous as it should be. To be really anonymous, it needs to be a lot bigger, and there needs to be a few other leaks that we need to fix. Taproot cover some of them. There's a few others, but in theory, at least, I don't care who you are because I'm holding your money. Like you've sent me cash. Right. With credit cards, I really have to know who you are. Because I need to chase you down if you don't pay, right? Or the credit card company does. With Lightning, it's like, no, you've literally given me the money. I'm literally holding it now within seconds. So I'll send you the stuff, dude. I don't really care who you are. That's fine. So that level of anonymity is really important. But what if you want to refund them? At the moment, what happens is you go, so who are you exactly? Tell me where to send the funds to. And you kind of break the anonymity in the case where you actually need to issue a refund. So Offers also covers this. You make up an identity, you send it along, and if they issue a refund, you prove that you were the person who did the original one. You're like, cool, that was me. Great. I'll send it wherever you say. And so it's also good for the merchant because they don't get those debates going, no, I was the one who paid. I was the one who paid. As a merchant, you don't know. This gives you that proof. There's a whole heap of really cool stuff. These are small innovations. But the reason they're important is we are used to a world with intermediaries. When you pay for someone, you've got a credit card company. If things go wrong, you can blame the credit card company and they sort it out, right? In a world of direct payments, it's you who you're going to call, right? You actually require cryptographic proof. With Lightning, and especially with Offers, with Lightning, you can prove that you paid an invoice. He gave me this signed invoice here, and I can prove that I paid it because he said, the invoice is for this secret, and here's the secret. And you go, oh, yeah, you did. They're lying, right? But But you can't, technically, anyone else can take the same proof and go, cool, I also have the secret now because you showed it to me to prove it. I was the one who paid it, right? Offers gives you this extra layer. No, I can prove that I paid it by creating a signature on this temporary ID I gave.
Yeah.
So, and that is actually, at the moment, nobody cares, right? People are using Lightning for all kinds of strange stuff. I'm sending money to people I know and stuff like that. It's not quite everyone knows who everyone else is, but it's still, you send your money to Bitrefill, they're not going to screw you over. You send money to the Blockstream store, we probably won't screw you over. I mean, there was that one time we didn't know if someone had paid, but other than operational errors, it's all pretty friendly, right? This is not sheep stations at the moment. But you've got to build a system for sheep stations, right? So that you can actually prove what it is. And a lot of people going, cool, we just want to be able to send money. It's like, well, that's great, but we're building for 10 years' time
100%.
when this is serious.
It's clearly a profound innovation that clearly Bitcoin needs. It's just, people say, oh, Lightning's only got 50 mil TVL, it's so shit. Look at PancakeSwap. We got, 1 billion TVL, total value locked in 2 weeks. Like, I was like, yeah, but it's on Binance chain. Like, what do it's ridiculous, right? So it's just standard people not having the ability to have.
We don't pay people to be on Lightning.
Of course. Yeah, obviously, yeah.
Can we ask Stefan regarding Stripe?
Yes. Yes, of course. Do you think, maybe in 5-10 years' time, when we're looking into the future, do you think that Strike is like the best platform at the moment to be able to get that going and to make that world happen? Stefan?
Oh, sorry, I wasn't sure. I missed the first bit. Yeah, but Strike, I think Strike is a big thing in terms of because so coming back to Rusty's point about how there's the whole store of value, long-term savings, digital gold aspect, and obviously I'm actually one of the people pushing that. But at the same time, I'm also a big fan of Lightning. Why? Think about it this way. The coins already exist. What we're talking about now is distributing those coins out to the rest of the world. And in order for most people to get Bitcoin, think of it this way, right? So 18.6 or 18.7 million coins exist today, or roughly, and it'll be 21 million someday, or a bit under that, right? Whatever. But ultimately, for most people to get some Bitcoin, someone else had to sell or to spend some coin, right? Or you had to mine, but very few people mine. So fundamentally, if we're going to distribute these coins out there, well, we need ways for that to happen. And for many people, that will be earning it. And for many people, some of them, obviously, a lot of people right now buy their Bitcoins, but in the future, I could see a lot of people earning it, and they could be setting up a store and saying, hey, I'm going to take Lightning payment. And then guess what? Now Strike and apps like that will enable all the fiat people to just download this app and then scan the QR and then pay. And so they pay with fiat, but then the Bitcoin person is receiving Bitcoin. And so it's like a new way to help distribute those coins out, if you will, right? That 18.6 or 7 million coins is going to get distributed out over time. I also think over the next few years, we'll see more and more advancement down the whole Michael Saylor style borrow against your coins aspect. So you collateralize, you put some Bitcoins up and they give you some fiat, and then you spend that fiat to buy things as opposed to spending your Bitcoins, because then that's more capital efficient and blah, blah, blah. Obviously, there are risks. There's no free lunch. You can get liquidated. But I think at conservative, collateralization levels, or if people just do like a small portion of their stack and borrow against that, I could see a lot of potential there. And then what does that do? Think of it this way. It's locking up even more coins and making it even harder to get supply, which what does that do? Pumps the price even harder and it kind of drives that feedback loop. So if I had to guess, I think we'll see a lot more people using the kind of Strike style apps, and we'll see a lot more people doing the collateralized loan thing. And I think it won't just be like Bitcoin companies like, Unchained Capital and other companies like that. We'll start to see like normal banks offer that probably in 5 years' time.
The number go up aspect of those collateralized loans as well will only be amplified if a few people as well decide to use those loans to buy more Bitcoin.
Yes, which is kind of it's just another leverage way of getting margin, right?
Leverage,
but it's just a different mechanism. It's like it's like maybe max to X margin. You know what I mean? But I think just the fact that depending obviously on what country you're in, you can save an immense amount of capital gains tax by borrowing against your Bitcoin. You're technically not selling, so you're not causing a CGT event, right? So that's interesting, right? So that on alone, I think if you have a lot of people who bought Bitcoin now it's worth 500K, like, well, you know, it's not getting a return, so you can get a BlockFi, get a return, or you can borrow against it and not, you know, trigger a CGT event. So as more of those services pop out, I think more and more people will use them, and obviously those services get better. So I think, you know, all these things are going to contribute to like some form of hyper Bitcoinization in the world. It's just, you know, that's just the roadblocks to get to that point. I think it's going to happen for sure. It's just.
But so you mentioned Strike. Does everyone know how Strike actually works? Right. So we don't have it in Australia yet, unfortunately. Jack, if you're listening,
please, we need you.
So Strike basically, the way Strike works is that you link it against your bank account and you scan Bitcoin QR codes, and it automatically deducts from your bank account, converts it to Bitcoin, sends the Bitcoin across, right? And they have the counterpart where you can receive in your native currency because it does the reverse sale. And they basically use the existing infrastructure that is around the world to supplies Bitcoin liquidity. There's like the exchanges in every country of the world, basically, who will quite happily take some margin on this, right? And so that's how it works. So for the end user, they just see, you know, they see US dollars at the moment usually, and they scan a QR code, and they don't even know they're using Bitcoin, really. The person on the other end may also be converting it into their currency, or they may be just keeping the Bitcoin, whatever. That's not even visible to the person sending, right? But it does provide this on-ramp, which is amazing. And, you know, so you ask about, you know, these roadblocks, and this is one of the things, like how the hell is this thing going to actually work? But, you know, people like Jack come along and figure out some way to make the pieces work together. And it is just an amazing experience. To see them do that. And his recent experience in El Salvador has really shown us what, you know, the power of this can be in places where, you know, they're already on US dollar economy, so they don't have their own fiat currency already. So it's probably a lot easier for them to like switch out a different currency for the USD.
Yep.
And you know. With the incredibly low cost of Lightning, it's become really appealing for them. Now, of course, the big test is how appealing will it be in a bear market. But you know, I think a lot of people in the Lightning world are following his experiments there with like a great amount of interest, and see how that goes.
Absolutely, we need more entrepreneurs like that doing, you know, fantastic things on top of Bitcoin, rather than, you know, a Bitcoin focused product is fantastic to see, because so many other people are just trying to find the next best thing and build on that, and then make their money, get the liquidity out, and then, you know, so it's fantastic to see for sure. So on that, I don't know if anyone has any questions. Do you have any questions?
Oh, no.
Just on Strike, not to spread any FUD, but isn't the whole idea of Strike kind of against the decentralization of, like, decentralization ideas of Bitcoin? I mean, you're throwing an intermediary in there. It's kind of like, are we trying to get away from that?
Okay, so.
But by the way, can you guys hear that question?
Oh, sorry, yeah.
I got the rough idea, but Rusty, you go for it.
Yeah, is the idea of Strike basically against the peer-to-peer kind of idea of Bitcoin and everything else? And I'm kind of like, well, you have to go back to the original idea of Bitcoin. How was it going to scale? There were always going to be Bitcoin banks, right? Eventually, I'm hoping that the industry will be mature enough that I can trust a Bitcoin bank, right? That I can go, cool, I can pick my, you know, I can do a 3 of 5 thing, I can choose 2 different banks, whatever, right? But that's a service, that is a real service. Is it centralized? Well, yeah, it is kind of, you know, but centralization isn't a thing, you know, it isn't sort of a be-all and end-all. Decentralization is there for a reason, right? You don't just decentralize because you can. And when you're talking about this intermediary between the world, the fiat world and everything else, you're going to have to accept some level of centralization. That's just the way the world works, right? And you kind of have to get there. The important thing is that access to that payment rail that they're using, Lightning, is open to everyone. So in an ideal world, in 5 years' time, nobody wants their product anymore because we're all, you know, we're mostly in Bitcoin anyway. This whole problem of how do I get Bitcoin has kind of gone away, and they'll have to either do something else or something more innovative, and I'm sure they'll find something, or everyone will just go, well, I could just download this free app and do it all myself, right? So I don't criticize them too much for sort of kind of this centralized solution. And it's hard to say, well, they're not pure, so therefore we should reject them. So I don't have a huge amount of tension there. I do have an amount of tension between the fact that when I designed the Lightning invoices, I didn't think you'd hand them to a third party to pay. So at the moment, Strike knows exactly, if you send, if you go, dude, Lightning payment and it's like $20 for weed or whatever, and I pay that using Strike, he gets that information. Not maybe entirely comfortable with that. Now, technically, there's no reason that he needs it. All he actually needs is the where to send it, the amount to send. So one of my other concerns is basically making that a reality so that we can do it so that the end user still pays it and you just use the payment rail. Because, I think there are some things you don't, otherwise they end up in a Venmo style thing where somebody pays for a Cuban sandwich and their account gets frozen because it had the word Cuba in it, and that's illegal in the US, and it all goes to shit, right? So I'm not sure they want the information either, and technically there are reasons why they don't need it. So there are things on the edges that do concern me, but it's one of the design points for offers and things is to make sure that we can outsource this information and that I can give the subset that the payment rails need without necessarily giving them everything.
Would you do that
I might
to
just add there. One thing just to add to what Rusty was saying, just for whoever asked that question, I recommend check out my recent interview with Jack Mallers. We talk about some of these questions because I ask him, hey, what about the self-sovereign Lightning user? And his view is more like, look, it's like an onboarding way, right? Because not everybody's going to come in being perfectly self-sovereign. The idea is you can start using this app and then later transition if that's really what you need to. You can transition to a more self-sovereign way. And the key part, and I think Rusty was touching on this as well, is that open interoperable nature, right? That, the same QR that Jack Mallers scans in Chicago is the same QR that someone in El Salvador scans. That's the important part, such that the overall system is still an open one. And it's not like kind of a, Venmo can't pay Cash App sort of system because they've all got their own little siloed, whereas Lightning is an open system.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just on that, do you think that the reason why he stores information for the transaction as a third party to stop regulators coming in, like prevent attraction of regulators to come in because they would want that information just in case? Do you think that's the case at all?
Yeah, so it's an interesting dance here, which is like,
because you don't want to attract them early on, like you want to be able to deal with them later on, right, when you're big enough.
Yes, so that's always part of it. But also is like, if you don't need to collect information, you shouldn't. Just on principle.
I agree. Yeah.
On principle, if you don't need to collect it, you shouldn't. Because if you are collecting it, then it's a trap for all kinds of reasons. You get hacked and all that information leaks. Or, or regulators come and go, well, you've got all this information, we want access to it. And if you can say, we don't have this information, that's a very different conversation. That's then they have to go, no, here are the good reasons why you have to collect this information. Not you're collecting it anyway, so just give it to us. It's like, no, we really want you to change what you're doing. In order to collect this information. It's a very different conversation to you have it anyway, let's give it to us. They already have complete KYC information because they have all the stuff to link to the bank. So they know exactly who you are, and all that stuff is already, that water's under the bridge. The question about individual payments. And so the weed one's kind of funny because of course it's still illegal in some places in the US and other less enlightened countries. But Jack Mallers' parents own a cannabis store. So, he's deeply and personally familiar with this tension here. Right.
Yeah.
So, and from the interview that Stefan did recently, you can see he's kind of got this. He's kind of straddling these worlds here. So yeah, it'd be interesting to get him over a couple of beers and get his real opinion. But
pick his brains.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
So one of the things that Jack Mallers was saying as well as a good use case is cross-border payments, right?
Yeah.
For those countries that they send their they're living in America and they're sending money from America going over to whatever country they're living in, like parents and all.
Yeah.
And obviously athletes as well. Like Russell Okung is starting to get a portion of the income in Lightning, using Lightning or in Bitcoin.
Sure.
I think he's on chain. I think those payments are big, right? So so his payments would be on chain. So it's really the whole take a percentage. I mean, for me actually it's kind of boring. So Blockstream have a scheme where you can take a percentage of your salary in Bitcoin, and we've had a bonus scheme forever, and then we introduced this scheme. It's every 2 years, but we do it differently. It's basically in 5% increments, so 0, 5, 10, 15, 20% of your salary from 2 years of the date, whatever the date is. But Blockstream actually buy that amount up front and hold it. So you get the same rate for the whole 2 years, same amount of Bitcoin, right? That is receiving your salary in Bitcoin, because if Bitcoin goes up, you get a free pay rise, right? But it requires, it works for Blockstream because we actually hold a significant amount of Bitcoin for various reasons, but we also mine. And so we have income in Bitcoin. So in some ways, it's almost easier than burning our cash runway, is to commit that. But I always found that really interesting. So we're seeing these early phases where, yeah, sure, you're taking 1% of your fiat currency in Bitcoin, but you could do that yourself. You could just buy or do a DCA, right? Yeah, maybe it makes it a little bit easier to have it all wired together for you. But more interesting would be to do something like, right, cool, I want to enter some agreement where I'll basically go, I'm going to receive the same amount of Bitcoin every month. And that has a certain amount of tension. What's interesting is it has a certain amount of tension in a company that you go, if the Bitcoin price really moons, then surely the VCs would just want to shut down the company, stop paying everyone and sell the Bitcoin, because they'd make more money that way. But fingers crossed it hasn't happened, and no one suggested it to them.
Not yet.
Anyone got any more comments? Maybe any general commentary of what's happening right now
I did want to
in this space?
perhaps add something about the Bitcoin banks. That was just pick a thread of something Rusty mentioned earlier about the idea of Bitcoin banks being, I know that he doesn't think this, but the idea that somehow they might be antithetical to the nature of Bitcoin. But if we've seen anything from people, we're, I think, a somewhat unusual tribe of people that take personal responsibility much more seriously than, dare I say, the average person. You've only got to see the amount of people whenever. There was an example I saw in the paper recently where a bank had shut down, sorry, they hadn't shut it down, but this guy had somehow sent his money to a Bitcoin exchange several times, but it ended up being sent to a scammer's account who then bought Bitcoin. And now this guy is trying to sue the bank because the bank was supposed to warn him not to do that, even though we already have the problem with banks shutting down people's accounts for this reason. But it's not because of the banks. It's because of guys like this. And by the way, it wasn't even the guy that got ripped off. It was his brother that was actually making the complaint on behalf of the relatively feeble-minded brother who got ripped off. And it sort of got me thinking, well, surely this brother, who already knew his brother was vulnerable, should have been the one who was in a much better position to step in and prevent his brother from being ripped off than the bank was. But it's the bank getting the blame. And then we wonder why the banks turn around and mess up everyone's Bitcoin trading and things like that between bank accounts and exchanges. But it raises a general point about the fact that I don't think in the real world, if Bitcoin is going to be truly mainstream, that simply everyone is going to be capable of being their own bank. They're going to get wiped out in seconds, and they're not going to have anyone to call or be able to blame for their losses. And so I think that there will have to be, and this will be perhaps where traditional banks can remain relevant in the new world, will be able to offer Bitcoin-denominated banking services to the general public. But that I don't think will end up being antithetical to Bitcoin, because the fact that Bitcoin itself is still decentralized, that will in a way keep the banks honest, because the banks will know full well that if they cheat, well, people can check that. They can see for themselves against the real blockchain and take their money out of there and put it with another bank. So I think you can kind of potentially get the best of both worlds in a future Bitcoin denominated world.
Yeah, absolutely.
I couldn't agree more. There's going to need to be services. Really, Bitcoin is a utility if you really think about it. Once hyper-Bitcoinization happens, a utility just like water and electricity is, right? You're going to need services on top of it to interface with the general population. I would argue 99% of the population cannot deal with hardware bullets. It's not happening. I'm sorry, it's just not happening, right? So you're going to need banks, maybe traditional banks with current owners, they transition, or more likely a startup pops up that innovates rapidly, that puts them out of business, right? So it 100% has to happen, and I think that banking is here to stay. It's just going to morph over time, for sure.
Oh yeah, no, in the future there's no single SIGs. Everyone's multi-sig, right? And as always, with Taproot especially, you won't even know how many multi-sigs, right? There'll be, and these services that will do that for you, and they'll probably have like huge buildings with marble, everything to reassure you that they're like taking your shit seriously, right? But the classic role of banks, like they're literally holding your money, and they do everything they can to assure you that they would never lose it, right? And this is a very classic banking kind of a model, like an old school banking model.
Yeah.
There's definitely a service. So hell, it's a service I would pay for, right?
100%.
Someone reliable is going to look after my keys and not hand it out to anyone who doesn't prove that they are me or my legal heirs.
Honestly, like having your own hardware wallet, and then it is stressful,
especially when you go out in a boat.
Yeah. Like when you go jet skiing or something, like what are you going to do, man? Like, it's on your keychain.
Oh, I lost it again. Sorry.
Yeah, fuck.
Sorry,
There's another
AGO.
Bitcoin gone. It's right. I got many more in a second. I'm kidding. Yes, I think that's all we have for tonight. Unless we have any more questions, any more commentary, I think we are done. Anyone else? Nope. Questions? Okay, well, thanks everyone for coming. This is a really great conversation with everyone. Thanks, Stephen and James.
Thanks.
James and James for joining. And very keen for the next meetup in, I don't know, 1-2 months maybe. We'll see.
Maybe we can get you up in Sydney again, Rusty, for a lightning special. Now that
yes,
called it over. Well, at least the borders are open interstate.
Yep. Soon. Great. Okay. Thanks everyone for coming.
Thanks everyone.